before even start with lecture 6. It is that these slides, these summaries that I have made for you are the most important points with regard to the exam. If you just focus on what I say in the lectures and on these summaries that I give to you, this would be very good for you. I mean, of course, I do advise you to enhance your reading, but these points are very much crucial to the exam. Let me start with the first point. The key to discourses is recognition. If you put language, action, interaction, values, beliefs, symbols, objects, tools, and places together in such a way that others recognize you as a particular type of identity, who you are, it means engaged in a particular type of what activity here and now, then you have pulled off a discourse and thereby continued it through history, if only for a while longer. What I mean by that? The key to discourse, to understand a given discourse, is recognition. To be able to recognize the identity of a person. And indeed, to recognize a person, you need other stuff, other things to help you recognize him or her. For example, if you see somebody in a room, and then you see him, for example, wearing a white robe and some medical tools, then and some papers on his office, then you would say, oh, come on, he is a doctor. Why? Not because he says that he is a doctor, but because of the knowledge he has in his mind with regard to medicine. But indeed, you have recognized him. The word recognition is derived from recognize. You have recognized him to be a doctor simply because you have seen some tools that are used by doctors, some papers that are used by doctors. So you have judged that person to be a doctor because of the shape of the room he is sitting in, because of, for example, the white robe he wears, because of some tools that are known to be used only by doctors. For example, shaking your chest, shaking your stomach. So we recognize people indeed because of such stuffs, or because of what they do. If, for example, you see somebody, even if he doesn't say that he's a doctor, but he is checking the health of somebody who is laying in front of him, and he is checking his health, for example, putting his hand here and there to make sure that his health is okay, or asking him about his temperature, asking him about the type of food he eats, or, for example, how he feels. So you would judge that he's a doctor because of the action he is doing. Now, the key to discourse is recognition as such. It is sometimes helpful to think about social and political issues as if it is not just as humans who are talking and interacting with each other, but rather the discourses we represent and enact and for which we are carriers. Now, suppose we have two people, two persons, and they are talking. You might judge that this person is the employer and that person is the employee simply because of the type of talk they have and the way they do have in. Indeed, from the very beginning of life, we have employees and we have employers. somebody who is responsible for another, somebody who receives the orders, and somebody who gives the orders. So this is what we mean. It is sometimes helpful to think about social and political issues as if it is not just us humans who are talking and interacting with each other, but rather the discourses we represent. The discourses we represent being a doctor or being the patient, being the employer or being the employer, being a native Indian or being a white American. This is what we mean by the discoursing, the discourses, I mean, and for which we are carriers. You carry a discourse. You carry your being a doctor. You carry your being an employer. You carry your being the teacher. You carry your being a student, for example. The discourses we enact, the discourses that you play the role of, the discourses we enact existed before each of us came on the scene. In other words, before you come to life, the discourses of being, for example, an employee or an employer, a doctor or a patient, existed already. When you are born and you grow up, then you might enact the role of the patient or the role of the doctor, the role of the employer or the role of the employee. The discourses we enact existed before each of us came on the scene, and most of them will exist long after we have left the scene. Even after our death, after we die, other people will come, and the discourse of being an employee or the discourse of being an employer will remain in our life, and other people will come to enact these two different roles or discourses. Discourses through our words and deeds discourses through our words and deeds carry on conversations with each other through history, and in doing so form human history. Think, for instance, of the long-running and ever-changing conversation in the US and Canada between the discourses of being an Indian. This is a discourse, being an Indian, or another discourse which is being an Anglo. So all the time we have these two discourses, being an Indian or being an Anglo. Even if you die, we have new generations. One of the people will play or enact the role of an Indian, and another person will enact the role of an Anglo. How we can judge you or that discourse to be an Anglo or an Indian? This is through the conversation they might have, or the way they might use, or the values they might have, or even in how they appear, how we do see them. The US and Canada between the discourses of being an Indian and being an Anglo, or of the different but equally long-running conversation. In New Zealand we might have the same scene, but between other people. For example, between being a Maori and being an Anglo, okay? Or for the matter, think of the long-running conversation between being a British Anglo and being an American Anglo. Means you are American, or you are American who is originally from England, for example. For example, this is the example that I have given to you. Some studies argue the physics, experimental physicists, those people who work in the field of physics, in large part, not in their heads. Some studies argue the physics, experimental physicists, no, is in large part not in their heads. We do not know them to be the people who work in the field of physics because what they have in their mind about that field of study. Rather, we can know that those people work in the field of physics. Rather, it is spread out, distributed, inscribed in, and often trapped in apparatus because of the kind of the apparatus they use. symbolic symbols, because of the tools, the books, the papers, the journals, the kind of the articles these journals have and they do have on their desks can tell us that this guy, this person works in the field of physics. So we judge them to be so because of the values they have, because of the way they behave, because of the type of books they read or they have on their desks. And institutions, the place where they do work, because of the room they sit in, you can judge he is a person who is working in the field of physics. You do not see what is in his mind, of course, and other people. The notion of discourses will be important throughout this book, throughout, in other words, our course. It is important, therefore, to make some points clear to avoid some common misunderstanding or misunderstandings. Imagine I freeze a moment of thought, talk, action, or interaction for you in the way in which a projector can freeze a piece of film. What the author means by that is the following. You might see two persons talking to one another. You might want to judge, because a little bit you are far from them, you want to judge who is the employer or who is the employee, or who is the Indian or who is the, for example, white American. You might find yourself unable to judge quickly. We freeze means sometimes you look at a movie, you couldn't understand what is going on. You might, as if it's a projector, you might ask somebody to stop it, to see it better, to think about it more and more. So sometimes we couldn't judge quickly. Why? Because we do not have the clues. We do not have the factors upon which we can judge whether he is the employer, this guy, this person, or he is the employee. He is, for example, the master, or he is whatever. Okay, so freezing means what? Thinking deeper on a scene you do see. This is the point, and this is what we mean by that. So, why you stop something to rethink about it? Because you feel that you do not have the factors on which you can depend to judge. So, we are talking about some stuff that can help you reconstruct a scene. Some stuff on which you can depend to judge a person, whether he is a doctor, whether he is a teacher, whether he is a student, and so on and so forth. So you need other clues, other factors. The notion of discourses will be important throughout this book. It is important, therefore, to make some points clear to avoid common misunderstandings. Imagine I freeze a moment of thought, talk, action, or interaction for you, in the way in which a projector can freeze a piece of film. To make sense of that moment, you have to recognize the identities and activities involved in it. Perhaps for this frozen moment, you cannot do so, so you move the film back and forward enough until you can make such a recognition judgment. Oh, now I see, you say. It is a real Indian raising another real Indian. Or it is a radical feminist berating a male for a crass mere remark, or its laboratory physicist orienting colleagues to a graph, or it is a first grader in Miss X's classes, means a student in the class of somebody who's named here X, starting a sharing time story. In other words, you say, oh, now I see. Oh, now I see. This means that you have recognized the people. And if you do recognize them, this means that you have seen some factors that help you to say that person is a student, or that person, for example, is, let me say, a real Indian, or that person is a person who works in the field of physics talking to his colleagues. This is what we mean by that. So, in other words, we wait something to perceive in order to recognize, and then to have the recognition needed to judge a given work or a given person. We need to know something about the activity people are engaged in, are involved in, before we can recognize them, before we can say whether they are so or they are so. They are teachers or students. They are doctors of linguistics or doctors of geography, for example. You need things. But for example, in a place, you just see maps of countries, and somebody there is sitting wearing glasses. Normally, or the map of the world, normally you would judge him to be a doctor, a teacher of geography. But in general, you wouldn't say that he is a doctor or a teacher of medicine, because we're talking about tools, we're talking about values, we are talking about stuff that are related to this job, this field of study, rather than another field of study. And this is what we mean by recognition. Recognition. You recognize him or her because of other stuff. This is what we mean by recognition work. You freeze the film, you freeze the scene, to really think about it, to really see it, to see other clues, other factors that can help you to judge. He is a real Indian. He is not. He is an employer. He is a student. This is what I call recognition work. You recognize the work. Okay. People engage in such work when they try to make visible to others and to themselves as well who they are and what they are doing. In other words, sometimes you enact in a way to help other people recognize you. You might behave in a way to help me recognize you to be the employer, so that I would know then how to talk to you. I might give you more respect. This is what we mean by that. There is another term that it is useful in place of the cumbersome phrase who doing what, at least as far as the language aspects of who doing what. Who means identity, who you are. A teacher, a student, doing what? Recognize your work, recognize your activity. Are concerned, remembering that language is caught up with other stuff in discourses. In other words, languages could not be understood but through using other stuff. Language is not enough to tell you who you are, what is your identity. We need other stuff, like the ones I have just mentioned. This term is social language. Guy 1996, Chapter 4, and Bachten 1986. Social language. I wish you will be with me now and try to understand what I'm going to say about social language, so it will be so easy for you once you read my own notes. Social language. If I am speaking to my father and mother, I would use a language which differs from the language I would use when I speak to my friends. Notice that I'm talking about the same language, which is Arabic. But how I employ Arabic language while talking to my father and mother differs from the way I do employ the function of my language while talking to my friends. And as such, keep in mind that I'm talking about Arabic language, the same language, but we are talking about different social languages. The language means the language used with my father and mother will be the language which shows respect to their being my mother and father, and I am their son. So it is a special language, it is Arabic. But in that language I will avoid using some terms, some words that I might use with my close friends, because they are my close friends, equals to me. When I leave my father and mother and I start talking to my friends in the street, I wouldn't be as formal as I was with my dad and my mom. I might speak while laughing. I might speak while using some words which are not possible to be used while talking to my father and mother as a matter of respecting to them. As such, we are talking about two social languages. The one used by my father and mother at home, and the one used my friends in the street. Suppose now I leave my friends in the street and I do go to the lecture hall to lecture, to teach my students. There, I will use Arabic, but I will use it in a way which differs from the one used by my friends and the one used by my father and mother. In other words, I'm talking about another social language. This is what we mean by that. Even if I want to describe the same event, the same story, I will use a language which differs from the language used with my friends and my father and mother if I want even to describe the same events or the same story or even the same person. I might say to my father and mother about somebody, I might say he is a bad person. But if I want to describe the same person, I would say that he's a bad person, but I might change the word bad and use another word, which could be possible to be used between me and my friends. And I might even talk about the same person that he is bad, but I might use another term to describe that characteristic while talking to my students. In other words, we're talking about different social languages. I say social languages because the society is the one which forces me to use that language, but not that language, because the society expected me to be a doctor here, so I have to use a language expected to be used by a doctor. With my friends, who are part of the society, I'm expected by the society to be their friends. They are part of the society. So, what is expected from the society to be between friends, part of which is the language. I couldn't speak to them formally. In other words, if I do so, as if they are not my friends. I'm a foreigner, I'm a stranger. When I talk to my father and mother, the society, or I'm expected from the society, or in our society, to show respect to your father and mother, you have to avoid using some bad words. You have to speak to them in a given way, in a certain way. So we have called it, or called these languages, social languages, because they come as a result of the society, and it's a pressure on us how to be. How to be is taken from the society, is what the society expects from you. So you use the language which can reflect what you are from the viewpoint from the society. Sometimes in our societies you might notice somebody speaking loudly in a bad way, you might say, oh, come on, is he a doctor? Is he a doctor? Why you say, is he a doctor? Not because what he has in his mind, you do not see him, see it, I mean, but the way, the language that is used by him, the way and the language used by him is not expected to be from a doctor. So we say, is he a doctor? Is he a doctor? As if we couldn't recognize him to be a doctor simply because of the social language used by him. Sometimes you might say, oh, come on, as if he is a doctor. He's not. But he uses a way which is, in a way or another, is linked with doctors, with those who are highly educated. And this is what we mean by social languages, and it is very much important to understand social languages and their dimensions and what we mean by that. Each of the who, doing, whats we saw in the aspirin bottle is linguistically expressed in different social languages. All languages, like English and French, are composed of a great many different social languages. Any language in the world has different social languages, not only English, not only Arabic, any language. Social languages are what we learn and what we speak. Social languages are what we learn and what we speak. I hope I have shed light on the most important points in this lecture, and I would like to thank you. Thank you so much.
السلام عليكم.